Forum organized in Qatar, it's losing to those platforms. And I would like to also mention the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum that has become a universal platform where really global problems are discussed, as well as the Eastern Economic Forum and of course the Valdai Discussion Club conference. So issues are discussed that are just in accordance with the current situation. And what we have witnessed during the recent Munich Security Conference, this situation testifies of the lack of the desire to see the reality. During the pandemics, they just were discussing how to put obstacles to the development of China and Russia, but people suffered from COVID-19. It was not studied enough back then. But the security, they were trying to discuss it somehow without any connection to the situation on the planet. So it's the lack of a desire or just strong desire to ignore the reality. It leads to self-destruction. What they are doing, or what they were doing at the Munich conference this year. Let me quote one example. We'll come back to the Munich conference, how they ignore this reality. Just have a look. At the end of February this year, the annual report by Norwegian Special Services, Intelligence Services was presented, and Counterintelligence of Norway. It has a lot of groundless accusations of our country, accusations of creating a whole range of threats. This time it's no exception. It's just one of the bricks of that road on which the Western community is walking, just refusing to admit the actual situation. According to those intelligence services, Russia is a source of immediate risks for Norway, European security, and the Western world order, as they put it. And during the Munich conference, also attended by Norway, they stated that their world order, rules-based world order, it does not exist. It just collapsed or was not built because everything was given to the Kiev regime as assistance. And how is Russia accused of being a threat to Western world order? And them simultaneously stating that they have not succeeded in building that world order. So any reaction to just actual threats, there is no such reaction. For example, environmental threats, it's lacking. Notably, they mention the interests of Russia and China in weakening the transatlantic alliance amid the disagreements over Greenland. So how are Russia and China engaged here in the context of Greenland and this transatlantic alliance of Russia and China? How did Russia and China influence the crisis situation in transatlantics? What have we done? We were not engaged in that. It's their problems, they created them themselves. They have a lot of claims, accusations against each other, stated directly or indirectly, so it's just ignoring the actual facts in favor of current situational interests. It's about Greenland, Ukrainian conflict, and the Nord Stream pipeline terror attacks. So it's They are not interested in actual facts and figures. It's just narratives about the rules-based world order. They are starting to forget about that and to abandon this meme, but other issues are still alive and on the agenda. It's just about Russia. They mention Russia's activities in different spheres of activity. The work of our embassy in Oslo, scientific vessels and fishing vessels. There are insinuations that there is the influence of the Kremlin everywhere. They have such illusions. Sanctions against Russian fishing companies, Norabo and Murman Seafood, under the pretext of their involvement in intelligence activities. Those sanctions are absurd. What else have they invented? What other ideas are in the offing? So Oslo's actions are not in accordance with the long-term interests of either Russia or Norway and their centricity. It does not have any relation to the reality. The use of some illusory narratives and the texts they are based on, and then they find themselves in the place that according to the NATO drills in the Baltic states, the Brussels military chiefs mentioned. And in this report, there are statements about the engagement of Russia. It's a very popular instrument of manipulation and intimidation of the population in Norway in order to justify their own problems or militaristic expenses, taxes, and expanding the powers of the intelligence agencies. So that's they are talking about it because they have been ordered by some of their curators or so-called allies in that transatlantic link. They just invent those statements that Russia makes them knows about Russia and China. So that's how the distorted reality is created with just illusionary threats, with aggressive plans that do not exist. So this illusionary picture is just stuck to the walls of the Munich conference on the issues of policy, security policy, in order for it to be more comfortable to state the end of the world order, the world order that is based on the non-existent rules. They just need to appeal to the issue of Russophobia in order to explain on the failures and the lack of logics in their actions. And now, at this moment, the Munich conference has become a parade of such ideas and tactics. And in the context of the issue of Norway and Arctic, we are against the escalation in the Arctic region and the preservation of this region as a space for international cooperation and peace. You know, we will come back to the issue of Munich. I would like to say a few words about the Arctic. There are a lot of statements about that, a lot of articles, comments, and our colleagues just make confrontational statements. This region is used in their narratives as a conflict potential zone. Our counterparts, it's their habit already to justify nearly any actions by Russia to qualify them as threats. So once again, in the context of what we have mentioned now, the reports of Norway intelligence services, the comments we have made, because the alleged Russian threat in the Arctic has been mentioned on many occasions in recent days, As a major Arctic power, Russia is interested in maintaining stability and peace in the Arctic region. This aim is enshrined in the concept of the foreign policy of the Russian Federation and other framework documents. It's our priority, despite any uh, oscillations in the political situation. We are ready to maintain dialogue with everyone who is ready for constructive interaction in the Arctic region and to resolve the issues in the polar region. The cooperation with foreign states that is developed in the Arctic is not against any other states.
Its target is the sustainable economic development, the improvement of life of the North, and concerns about the indigenous peoples. All those who are interested in the Arctic are referred to experts rather than just fan lovers. They are aware of the fact that the attempts to blame Russia for this is unbiased. The development of the Arctic region is our legitimate right. The Russian infrastructure beyond the polar circle, including the military one, has long existed consistent with the current environment and plays an important role for defense and other purposes. We see that the bloc-associated discipline, or major, in fact, it's the command and administration of the NATO, and I refer to all our NATO states, continue to build up its military presence, engaging the armed forces from extra-regional countries. Many drills are being taken, including against the false actor, and we know that it is Russia. So I think that the one who is to blame for all these actions are the Europeans and the Western countries themselves. And I believe that it has nothing to do with Russia and China. It's not just a geographic part of Russia, but an integral part of the cultural identity of our citizens. It's a home to indigenous peoples of Russia who explored the polar circle region. And very soon we will have another occasion to remember about that. We celebrate the Arctic Day on the 28th of February. Russia supports the development of Arctic region, concerns about the well-being of its citizens and the environment. So any attempts to impede that process are doomed to a failure. And let me continue the Munich topic, if you don't mind, because out of the pocket, we are now witnessing debates on the Navalny case. Although it seems that there is an international mechanism, this is both bilateral cooperation and law enforcement authorities and international organizations who for all these years have been exploring and studying and analyzing the same cases, trying to find some information. But they don't need it because there is the Munich conference, security conference, which is used for that purposes. We've seen a lot, but still raise our eyebrows. With the Skripal's cases and the same stories on the Navalny poisoning on the 16th of February, the court, which deals with the facts and chemical formulas, the whole world has seen another anti-Russia narrative about the case of Navalny, who was accused of fraudster and then blamed for the spread of terrorism, in addition to insinuations and allegations of the so-called poisoning by the Novichok poison. 2 years after, we are facing another accusation, but this time of the poison, of the frog poison. To all those who is not following the Skripal case, I think this would sound weird and awkward. Because it's unbelievable that the serious experts would publicly flare up tensions in order to draw attention to the Munich conference. But let me remind you that there was the Skripal's code, there were lies. There was a lot of evidence near the lake where the Skripals was sitting. And so it's all one and the same story. This is the invention of the information agenda with such bright traps to attract attention of just the common citizens. They are referring to some chemicals, formulas, labs, analysis, OPCW. It's all this is the concern of the experts. And the Western countries are right now trying to engage all other common people. And it's simple here. The authors of this scenario yet two of them bet on triggering another primitive anti-Russian narrative in order to flare up the anti-Russian narrative at the Munich conference. But their fantasies and their delirious mind conceal a history-long experience of the British colonizers. And this expels just surprise. And we need to offer a plausible explanation. But right now we see that this Russophobic campaign is beyond any reason. And we have already mentioned it during this briefing. We hope that these states, the request of the OPCW, will be responded in an adequate manner. Let me recall you that the Russian Federation for many years has been waiting for the response from the UK on the outstanding issues on the Skripal's cases. For example, in September 2018, Foreign Office informed our embassy about the denial of our request submitted by the Prosecutor General's office request for legal assistance. And since the provocation, and that's how we view it, Salisbury provocation, the embassy of the Russian Federation in London sent over 60 diplomatic notes to the Home Ministry of the UK. 60 requests have been sent. And I cited you the figures that are based not on the comments or briefings or some messages or social posts. These are official requests to the Home Office of the United Kingdom to submit any information on this regard. So these our requests, I would call them so, because they were very substantial documents. We showed our intention to cooperate and engage on this topic. Many of the questions we raised have not been responded yet. On some points we were just brushed off. The same situation was with the previous scenario with Mr. Navalny. Our numerous requests to the countries complicit of this provocation, as well as the technical secretariat of the OPWC, sent by the Prosecutor Generals and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia under Article 9 of the PCW, and they were submitted under the legal assistance request under the European Convention 1959. They were not responded, all of them. Likewise, the principal question on whereabouts and how, beyond the territory of Russia, the biomaterials of Navalny ended up in having the traces of the substance found by the German chemists, unknown specialists from France, Sweden, which were studied by two relevant labs selected by the OPWC Technical Secretariat, whose flag is concealed. And I wonder, and I think the whole world is wondering, because we're hearing a lot of things about this case, questions to the answers to the original questions. But that's not the case. Now these are frogs who help the West. As of today, the Skripal's cases and other allegations, the Russian Federation and its permanent mission in UK, Germany, France, Sweden, as well as the Prosecutor General's Office of Russia, submitted the requests to the above-mentioned countries as well as to the Technical Secretariat, submitted over 100 diplomatic missions, official requests, and other requests. And there is no wonder that we have not received any answers yet. Instead, the fever-mind cheerleaders continue to make new horror movies about anti-Russia policy in order to nurture these sentiments in the countries. And I wonder, and I can cite the Epstein files with the horrible crimes, and they concealed it. I know that they have a well-made and invented story of the Skripal's cases and the tool they used to use. Right now, it's about frogs. And shortly after the announcement of these allegations, as for the reasons of death, the French made other remarks. And I think that's because there are frogs that are connected with this case. The Foreign Minister of France, Mr. Barrot, went even beyond, claiming that our country is ready to use bacteriological weapon warfare against its own population. And I think they are not aware of what is happening inside the country. Here, they all the time claim that it's bacteriological weapon. And let me remind you that before that, they referred to chemical weapons. And right now, it's bacteriological warfare. If you don't mind, I'll answer to all these messages in the social media. I think the top officials of France. The French foreign minister must be recalled the story of his own country. The case of poisons has become the most outrageous and high-profile cases of the Louis the 14th. Back then, a network of fraudsters was acting at that time who supplied poison to rich women who wanted to kill their own relatives or husbands. And we know how such ladies in Paris act against their own husbands. These poisons back then was called as the substance of heirs because they were used in order to get money and the heritage. A special chamber and court was even established to investigate into such cases. Dozens of people were blamed for that and sentenced to death, about 400 people, including one famous lady in France. It became a tool to fight and led to the hysteria. And Louis XIV ordered to destroy all the documents with poisons. 150 years later, France has witnessed a process which has become very famous. In 1840, a young woman, Marie Capelle-Lafarge, was blamed for poisoning her husband with another substance. The story was internationally known. Why? Because the process was written all across the world. Why? Because for the first time in toxicology, it was the main instrument of the testament. The defense argued the analysis. And this case has become a milestone in forensics, medical forensics, and that was the start point of the scientific base proving the poisoning. Tell me, please, and I wonder if in 1940 in Central Europe, and particularly in France, this method of scientific evidence was chosen. We can remember it right now and wonder, where are these formulas? So just a common person makes his blood test, providing material with a stamp, all the relevant documents, on the medical documents with all the names on it. I wonder, what's the point here? It has nothing to do with all those frogs poisoning. because no official organization or lab can write such things. But even back then, in Central Europe, this methodology was used, and I refer to these attitudes towards investigation. I think they should recall it. Likewise, the classical writers, since we've started to memorialize these Skripal's cases. And let me cite you French writers, great French writers, for example, Alexandre Dumas, who invented the image, a demonizing image of Catherine de' Medici. And he knew what he was doing. In this novel, the poison becomes a tool of big policy, and Dumas describes this in detail, brilliantly. Let me recall you that there is a notion of Charles IX, and let me stress this, it's a fiction. But reflects. René, listen to me. You poisoned with your gloves the Queen Navarskaya. You poisoned with the smoke of the lamp the Prince Parsin. You tried to poison with the apple Prince Condé. And these are quotes from the novels of Dumas. But the well-known doctor, he's not a writer but a doctor, the doctor Ambroise Paré viewed that all the perfume, gloves, and jewelry and cosmetics made by the royal masters had poison in them. And historian records believe that she was the one to blame for the killing of Henrik IV, who was offered poisoned gloves. So, when next time the French Foreign Ministry wants to talk about poisoning, I think they'd better start about their own history, the history of France. And right now we will switch to the situation in Ukraine.
Recently, it has been 12 years since the tragic events whose main point was the anti-constitutional coup d'etat in Kiev. Under the mottos of democracy, their favorite mottos, freedom of speech and fighting corruption, of course, and the promises of a bright European future. The crowd of strongmen, of militants, radicals, puppets of Western political elite. This crowd of radicals manipulated by the West has replaced the legal authorities. And what was the end of that, and what is the continuation? I think I do not need to repeat that. We see that every day. It led to just rampant nationalism and ignoring human rights, fighting Russian language and history, deterioration of economic situation, and the collapse of social institutions in Ukraine as such. The consequences of the political crisis that started back then could have been not so hard. There was a chance, and it was given by the document signed in 2014 with the mediatorship of Germany, France and Poland of the agreement that envisaged constitutional reform and immediate presidential elections. Its implementation could have provided, and nearly all the political experts say that, could have avoided those tragic events. But the idea of those mediators, it was different. And the winners of Euromaidan, it was just an unneeded obstacles to the ruling positions, financial flows, material resources. It was just connivance of Western guarantors of the agreement. The US, the EU, they just did not even try to correct those opposition figures and to demand the observance of their commitment. They just hurried up to state the change of power in Ukraine and started to promote that anti-Russian beastly, those beastly actions, Russophobic policy stimulated, and they started, instead of taking into account historical peculiarities, ethnocultural peculiarities of Ukraine, started to construct the ethnocratic state not for everyone. Just remember the Euromaidan motto: Ukraine will become Ukrainian and humanless, with no people. And Tymoshenko just called upon shooting from nuclear weapons. The Russians and Russian-speaking citizens residing in Ukraine. It's just okay for the political, so to say, reality situation of another experiment field for the Westerners. For the development of the situation is well known. Those who protected the constitution, who did not accept the coup d'etat, they were accused of being traitors to the interests of Maidan. Because it's obvious that the interests of Maidan are not the interests of the people of Ukraine. Moreover, they were declared terrorists. Just imagine those people who said they have elected the authorities, did it legally, they voted. And they had the constitution that was not cancelled by anyone, regional laws. They were named terrorists. And those who are now killing civilians, killing them by Ukrainian army drones, and attacking with Lepistok mines that maim children, and then killing doctors who are trying to help civilians, women and children, and continue to send drones of the Ukrainian army. They do not call them terrorists. They do not call terrorists those who caused explosions of Nord Stream, who shoot at oil reservoirs and the oil pipelines. They do not call terrorists those who destroy hospitals and schools. No. National radicals just started back then to mercilessly exterminate the population of Ukraine. Because they are talking about anti-constitutional actions in Ukraine. Because those people, they stood for the preservation of the constitutional order. That was the native population, and there was another meeting of the contact group within the Ramstein format for defense cooperation with Ukraine under the chairmanship of Germany. It was just false accusation against our country for this catastrophic situation of the civilians in Ukraine, and supporting those Ukrainian army soldiers who kill civilians, just facilitating terror attacks against civilians. The Pentagon had ignored that meeting again, but it was the first event for new Ukrainian Defense Minister Fedorov, who provided a long list for the supplies of long-range missiles, different munitions, and so on. As a result, the Europeans, despite the exhaustion of their own stockpiles of weapons and poor economic figures, offered military aid of $35 billion to Ukraine. The main sponsors of Ukraine are Germany, Norway, $7 billion. And they needed those reports against Russia for that. Sweden, that will pay 3.7 billion euro, Britain 3 billion British pounds. It's a modest support in comparison with Sweden and Norway. Denmark as well, among the leaders of military supplies to Ukraine. They just bore the burden of more than 24 billion euro from 29 billion euro. It's just investing into the slaughter. They're not worried about the Kiev regime not being able to win on the battlefield. In this hybrid war unleashed by themselves, because it's just an instrument. And the purposes of the Kiev regime itself are not able just to steal, to kill. It's not of interest to them. The aggressive purposes of Rammstein and similar gathering, it was stated by Rutte. He said that the support to Ukraine should go on despite the peaceful negotiations, and the alliance believes that it is necessary to further strengthen the Ukrainian army military potential in order to put obstacles to Russia. And now let us remember, back then they demanded a ceasefire. The Westerners requested a ceasefire from Russia, and now they are talking about supplying weapons to the Kiev regime despite peaceful negotiations. They just aim to continue the slaughter, the hybrid war, and someone steals, someone just enjoys the killing, someone just explaining to their own voters why it is the case and why those problems have appeared. So NATO Munich Security Conference, I will just not provide more details because I think it's already clear. But former Western politicians, they highlighted that the militarization of Ukraine and the EU will continue despite the dynamics of the settlement. So the question is, what about the settlement if despite its progress and dynamics, the slaughter will continue with even more zeal, as we understand now from their aspirations. And now we see who wants peace and who does not want that, who's never wanted it. And that confirms the lack of interest of the British EU war party to search for the end to this conflict. So it's just beastly statements by Zelensky himself. He thanked the EU members for the so-called military credit of 90 billion euros. And he called upon them to continue their actions to supply funds to the Ukrainian army and weapons. And he said that he will not take into account any losses. Just imagine his election program if he is to participate in elections, or will continue to implement this offer of the West despite any losses. So who will vote for him? At least one vote. So he does not need any elections just to swear allegiance before those allegiance until the last Ukrainian, before those who provide funds for him. And who needs to continue this bloody corruption scheme, taking into account that hundreds of billions of funds have been allocated these years, but a fact remains a fact. During the Munich conference, he mentioned his intention to monthly kill 50,000 Russians. It was just his insane ideas about NATO membership, requests from NATO and EU members, some 30, 50-year strong, and he said, security guarantees. He said that there will be no election and political settlements without the ceasefire. It's against the background of the statements by Europeans to which he had applauded. Despite the negotiations and settlement, they will not stop those hostilities, but he requested a ceasefire, so unilateral ceasefire. They hope that Russia will pause all that and absorb the supplies of weapons, rearmament of the Kiev regime, and without taking into account its losses. So let them just search for fools themselves. Zelensky tried to focus on the his main target, combating Russia. It was a disagreement within the transatlantic partnership. German Chancellor Merz has mentioned that. He said that the transatlantic partnership, it's a quotation, no longer something that they can take for granted. The Germans can take for granted. He said it's a big abyss, end of quote. So this support is regarded by the Kiev regime as a carte blanche for terrorist crimes, military crimes. Before another negotiations round in Geneva that has now started, he intensified attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure of Russia. The sites of water supply, electricity supplies, and he does not conceal that. And this week, 147 civilians in Russia suffered from Ukrainian army actions. 21 people died. I will just quote the specific facts. In the Belgorod region on the 11th of February, there was a shell wound caused to a 14-year-old girl, and as a result of a missile strike in Belgorod, 2 employees were killed and several were wounded. 5 people also suffered. There were casualties in settlements, and children suffered. Due to HIMARS strikes, 2 people were killed and 3 were wounded. As a result of the attack of a drone against a civilian car, a civilian was killed. And on the 14th of February, there was a massive strike of enemy drones in the region. Many drones were destroyed, and an employee of a mobile company was wounded. A person engaged in reparation of the network. In the Donetsk People Republic, the settlement of Velika Lebetika, as a result of a drone strike, children were wounded, 9 and 10 years old. On the 13th of February in Malakokovka settlement, passenger cars were struck by drones and 14 people were wounded. One civilian was killed and 23 were wounded. Also, a 10-year-old girl, Volgograd region, a house was struck, a house of a big family with many children. A 12-year boy was wounded. The house was totally destroyed. So those killed, those wounded children, women and old men, old people, elderly people, did they participate in fighting, in hostilities? Were they just legal target of the servicemen? But they were the target of those who considers them a target for themselves, considers this target as legal terrorists. It's obvious violation of international humanitarian law, international terrorist acts, and international organizations keep silent about that. And the punishment of foreign mercenaries is just inevitable. 9,000, more than 9,000 cases have been initiated by Russian prosecution. His Russian volunteer corps, Vasily Kirishenko, he developed plans to invade and accusations are put against him. The commander of Marine Corps of the Ukrainian Army, Alexander Shevtsov, who ordered in 2024-2025 of unmanned vehicles, attacks in the Black Sea and private houses in Tuapse. He is on the international wanted list and sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment. Citizens of Finland, Sulka Koski-Konsti, and Japanese citizens Yuya Matamori, they are on the international wanted list. All the named fact confirms the relevance of the tasks of the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine and the elimination of threats from its territory. The aims will be fulfilled, as repeatedly stated by Russian leaders, and the participation of mercenaries in the Ukrainian conflict. The cutting-edge weapons that are supplied to the Ukrainian armed forces, they can not be used by the Ukrainian soldiers who lack skills to use such weapons. It can be done only by foreign specialists like American HIMARS system, British French Storm Shadow system, and other weapons used for Kiev regime in order to strike our territory. Moreover, foreign councils are engaged in the development and intelligence operations with Western data and Western systems of targeting.
The foreign mercenaries fight on the side of Ukraine. They are being engaged for exploitation of the foreign planes. At first, The Hague supplied 24 old F-16 jet fighters. Right now, these are instructors, and I think next will be the hit pilots. So we see how they save their money because they don't need to pay for the disposal. And I think that's not the first case when the Dutch mercenaries are being engaged in a direct conflict with Russia. And let me remind you that the mercenaries are not covered by the international law and they are not under the Geneva Convention, and we also would advise them to read the eyewitnesses' accounts. For example, the major Dutch newspaper Telegraph published on the 10th of January. This is the Dutch media. So Russia has nothing to do about the spread of false information. This was an interview given by a volunteer in the Netherlands, telling that every morning the Ukrainian army starts by not by photos and not by the anthem, but by the Nazi welcoming. He also told us that everything, all the wallpapers are with a swastika and Nazi signs. Along with the mercenaries in the Ukrainian army, there are drug traffickers. They are boasting of the photos with cut heads, with tortures. And I think The Hague doesn't bother it because it continues to fund Ukraine. And it's a shame for the complicity, because all the Dutch citizens are paying taxes in order to fund all these massacres and atrocities. So in this regard, let me recall that any foreign mercenaries, the so-called presented in Ukraine, who are participating in the hostilities against Russia, are becoming a legitimate military target, irrespective of their jurisdiction in Ukraine. I think they won't be given any mercy. And this interviewer, not in the mass media, as I've already mentioned, in the European mass media, in the native mass media, should become a morning prayer for them. And all this global environment has those who receive salaries, and I refer to international officials, who should have become a voice of reason. They should have become some wise men, advancing the knowledge and the truth on what is happening in Europe and how to settle it. They should at least try to do so, but one more time we can report that this is a publicly biased approach of the UN Secretariat, which communicates to the international community with violation of all charters and provisions of the UN, underpinned on the principles by the UN office. The Secretary General of the UN Secretary General concluded that in respect of Ukraine, the respect for territorial integrity prevails over self-determination. And we know that these principles are reflected in the Declaration of International Law adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1970, based on the consensus. Completely ignoring the provisions of this document and advancing alternative interpretation of Articles 1 and 2, the Secretary General abuses his powers. And moreover, he is acting against any settlement. And we are compelled to recall that the UN Secretary General is not entitled to interpret the principles of the UN Charter on behalf of the World Organization. Consistent with Article 97, the UN Secretary General is the principal administrative official, and while his statements, the statements of Guterres, are beyond his administrative mandate. So we see a clear violation of Article 100, which states that Secretariat should keep the principles to neutrality, impartiality, and objectivity, and act for the benefit of all the state members. Loyalty to the principles and objectives of the United Nations, along with the provision on the personnel of the United Nations, is one of the main principal tasks and functions of all the official servants of the United Nations. Loyalty to the UN nations and to its principles, rather than to the state or group of states. Nevertheless, Mr. Guterres puts himself above his employees and above the member states. His statements are inconsistent with the principles, targets, and objectives of the United Nations, which are to settle and prevent conflicts, but hinder their implementation, compromising the authority of the United Nations. I think that these statements reflect some personal perspectives of the citizen of Portugal or the official policy of the government rather than the position of an official of the United Nations. And once he is still the UN Secretary General, we would advise him to leave his own mind behind and behave professionally, consistent with the documents which regulate his mandate. Yet another topic. We mentioned the intentions of Tokyo to join the NATO mechanism of procuring military equipment for the Kiev regime. Although the Cabinet of Ministers denies any final deal, we believe that this decision is highly likely based on the stance by the Japanese government on the situation in Ukraine. We highlighted on previous occasions that inclusion of Tokyo to anti-Russia initiatives is not conducive to the settlement of the crisis. Moreover, it only flares up the conflict. The equipment that will be supplied with the Japanese money will become another legitimate target for the Russian army. Moreover, these actions will complicate the Russia-Japan relations, which have already been significantly cornered. Another topic, and I'm talking about Moldova. We've got a lot of questions, and taking into account that the Moldovan authorities continue to aggravate the situation. On February 13th, the President, Maya Sandu, at the 62nd Munich conference said that at the September parliamentary elections held in 2025, Russia was claiming that if the Moldovans do not vote for the pro-Russian forces, and then I quote, Moldova will follow the same example as Ukraine. And let's face the truth. Indeed, the situation in the country has become deteriorating since late 2020, when the anti-Russia party came to power. But Chisinau lives in a distorted reality, which follows a Russophobic policy which polarizes the society and undermines the sovereignty of the country. Let me cite a couple of examples. The government continues to play with the Kiev regime. On February 11th, the Parliamentary Commission on Foreign Policy and the Euro-Integration of Moldavia blessed the bilateral deals on reconsidering the agreement on military and technical cooperation with Ukraine. With whom? And guess whom? With Ukraine. This deal is of 1993. The Moldovan officials claim that this document provides for studies on exploration, cybersecurity, logistics, and current technologies, modern technologies. The Republic, there was an outrage in Republic people are wondering about the root causes of such actions. Such a revision of the legal framework with a state which is in conflict, and it is highly likely that this agreement hides something, and the citizens are waking up to an idea that they don't know the truth about this. And this can become yet another step towards engaging Moldova into hostilities. The Orthodox Church is being discriminated as well in Moldova, which is being so widely practiced in Moldova for over several weeks. The parishioners of the Orthodox Church in the Derineo settlement are trying to prevent its transfer to the Bessarab metropoly of the Romanian Orthodox Church. The media report that this decision on changing the jurisdiction of the church was adopted by the Supreme Court of the Republic. Right now, many countries go to court not for settling a legal dispute concerning the property or some copyrights or property, but go to court in order to make the believers to change the religion or their beliefs, to divide and to rewrite and to change the cultural identity. I've heard and read historical accounts, but I believe that these times have already gone. But right now we're seeing the Human Rights Declaration. There are a lot of human rights organizations and religious freedoms right now. But nevertheless, it comes as that. By the way, many people are saying that this decision to change the jurisdiction of the church was adopted by the Supreme Court of the Republic, and these signatures were forged. The Moldovan government continues to cancel Russian culture, and the media reports that the textbook on Romanian, and this is the Moldovan language, and literature for the second grade, the novel on the fisherman and the fish, they claim that this was written not by Alexander Pushkin, but by Helena Gerber, the American citizen. And I'm speechless here. The government publicly glorifies the Romanian collaborators, and open sources claim that the school calendar contains the date of birth of the former Prime Minister of Romania of 1937 and 38. This Prime Minister, Kevin Gogi, stripped off the citizenship of almost 25,000 Romanian Jews. And these anti-Russian narratives are being advanced by the Moldovan authorities, which impact the nation and the people of Moldova. So we mentioned religion and beliefs. Many countries have institutions which deal with and prepare reports on the rights of the believers, and there is such an institute in the United States as well. The administration draws significant attention to the Orthodox Church, and intensification of the church question is in line with the mobilization of the US, preventing to spread the neoliberal values which the Biden administration prolonged and advanced. Instead, they use the religion, they weaponize the religion. And the assessments with religion in various states, released in the reports of the United States State Department and NGOs, the Commission on Religious Freedom, the Commission on Security in Europe, the International Alliance for the Freedom of Alliance, are very biased, and these reports on freedoms, religious freedoms, are distorted or completely ignored. The support of some ethnic groups in the Middle East comes along with cherry-picking criticism of those governments and the governments charged with discrimination of religious minorities. An illustrative example is the pressure exerted by the US on the Nigeria's government and whose efforts to fight religious intolerance were just ignored. As for Russia, the UN reports systematically charge Russia with violation of religious freedom, citing and referring to criminal prosecution of members of extremist organizations whose activity is banned, is unlawful and illegitimate in Russia. They also spread unjustified allegations on religious rights violations. But as for the crimes of the Kiev regime against the Russian Orthodox Church and the clergy, the international community has never heard of any response of Washington, while the Russian Federation questions on many occasions the religion question. And let me recall that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs published already 2 reports on illegal actions of the Kiev regime against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, published in 2023 and 25. The report on human rights in Ukraine in 2025 and persecutions on the believers have this whole section which cites specific facts and comments describing discriminatory laws of Ukraine against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, citing illegitimate actions of the Ukrainian Special and Intelligence Services. They are citing forcible occupation of churches, intolerance and aggression, manifestation of intolerance and aggression against the clergy and the believers of the Orthodox Church. And I wish that the American authorities, likewise the relevant international agencies, paid attention to the sufferings of the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, proving that they are being abused. The fact that the Kiev regime funds de facto these large-scale religious persecutions in modern Europe, and this would become the most valuable contribution to Washington's efforts to protect the freedom of religion in the world, but they ignore the Christians and the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. Another topic, with artificial intelligence, in 2025, the United Nations established specialized platforms for artificial intelligence and international scientific panel. Over 30 candidates with the relevant expertise on AI wanted to join these agencies, and despite the efforts of some countries to hinder the process, the final list by the United Nations containing the Russian expert was adopted on February 12. We hope that this panel will hold depoliticized debates, that we hope for the meaningful and valuable contribution, that the scientific group would focus on the global dialogue and provide professional assessments, as well as initiatives aimed at strengthening the UN central role on artificial intelligence, bridging the digital divide of the states, as well as equal access and non-discriminatory access to the software. We appreciate the commitment, the consistent dedication of the UN Secretariat and UN Office on digital and new technologies, and we will continue to support this policy for the best solutions for the benefit of the humankind.
There have been some questions by a number of media outlets in order to assess the cooperation of Russia and Central Asian states. We have prepared the relevant comment. I would like to confirm that the Central Asian states are our closest neighbors, allies, and strategic partners. We are interested in stability, security, and prosperity of this region, increasing the economic, resource, and technological independence of all the states, preserving their cultural and national peculiarities. We respectfully treat the multi-vector foreign policy of our Central Asian friends, driven by their aspiration to expand mutually beneficial cooperation with all countries, primarily in terms of their domestic socio-economic development. They are aware that the damage caused by severing ties with Russia will not be compensated by anyone, however tempting the West's promises can be. So they are aimed at cooperation, and Russia is among the leaders of key trade partner in Central Asia. The total trade turnover for the first 9 months of 2025 amounted to approximately $35 billion. There is also no alternative to Russia in terms of ensuring security in the region, including through our military presence in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, countering the threats of international terrorism, Islamic radicalization, and drug trafficking. Apart from traditional bilateral contacts that are quite intense at the highest level and at high levels. On the 9th of October, the second Central Asia-Russia summit was held in Dushanbe. Now we are working on implementing the joint action plan for 2025-2027, which includes sections such as trade and economy, energy, transport, healthcare, and sanitary and epidemiological welfare, cultural and humanitarian cooperation, ecology, migration. A small announcement: on the 21st of February, we mark the International Mother Language Day. It is marked internationally, established by the UNESCO General Conference in November 1999 to draw attention to the need to promote linguistic and cultural diversity. Our country has accumulated extensive language policy experience over many decades. It is in demand by our international partners. So Russian is studied in secondary schools, used as a language for education at universities, and minority languages are integrated into the Unicode system. According to the decree of the President of the Russian Federation last year, the Day of Languages of the Peoples of Russia was established. It will be celebrated on the 8th of September. And the International Decades of Indigenous Languages is held from
использования информационных технологий как инструмента продвижения языкового разнообразия. Вот в этом году запланирован, например, крупный тематические конференции в Ханты-Мансийске, Саранске, где ожидается участие экспертов из десятков стран. День родного языка дает повод упомянуть о таком, в общем, неприглядном явлении, как, или лучше даже сказать, позорном для современного мира, как попытка отмены русского языка и вообще всего русского в целом в ряде недружественных стран. даже не дружественных стран, а рядом недружественных режимов. На сегодняшний день можно заявить об очевидном провале этой кампании. Русский язык стабильно остается в пятерке самых распространенных в мире, широко используется в качестве официального и рабочего языка на международных площадках, также является одним из немногих сохраняющих статус глобального. На нем говорят на всех континентах. Он уверенно востребован в науке, культуре, дипломатии, ну, конечно, и в информационном пространстве. И яркое подтверждение этому проведенное в прошлом году в Москве 18-я ассамблея русского мира и участие в ней представителей из 105 стран. А вот эта безудержная, страшная, чудовищная русофобская кампания, напротив, выявила наличие у нашей страны огромного пула единомышленников, союзников и друзей. В мире здравомыслящих людей больше, и они искренне симпатизируют нашей стране, восхищаются достижениями в сфере культуры, науки, спорта, разделяют и те духовно-нравственные ценности, которые мы сформулировали для себя, а соответственно и общие цивилизационные духовно-нравственные ценности. Видим, в каких непростых условиях им зачастую приходится действовать. Это беспрецедентное давление, и спецслужб, это и репрессии в отношении русскоязычных граждан, это аресты и другие методы воздействия. Несмотря на все это, они продолжают работу по популяризации русского языка, популяризации и распространению русской культуры, не боятся поддерживать контакты со своими российскими визави. Ежегодно отмечаемый по всему миру День русского языка и День славянской письменности и культуры с каждым годом сопровождаются все более массовыми мероприятиями. К нашим посольствам и русским домам все чаще присоединяются организации российских соотечественников, представители академического сообщества, другие ценители русской словесности. Такие мероприятия проводятся и на площадках международных организаций, ну, например, ООН, ЮНЕСКО, в том числе совместно с представителями других и с представителями и с представительствами других государств-участников СНГ. Нельзя не отметить, с каким триумфом в прошлом году прошли гастроли академического ансамбля песни и пляски российской армии имени Александрова в Республике Гватемала, Республике Коста-Рика, Республике Парагвай, Объединенных Арабских Эмиратах, Республике Зимбабве, Республике Мадагаскар. Очевидно, что многочисленные зрители концертов и спектаклей российских музыкальных, театральных коллективов, выступающих в самых разных уголках планеты, про то, что они должны отменить все русское, ничего не знали. Ну, а многие просто посмеялись, когда услышали о том, что якобы нас где-то отменяют. Российская культура была, есть и будет. Богатая, самобытная, составляющая неотъемлемую часть культуры мировой, вообще мировой цивилизации. У нее колоссальный потенциал. Это важнейшая часть образа нашей страны, которая способна работать на укрепление международного авторитета нашей страны и, самое главное, на оздоровление международных отношений, формирование объективного представления как о нас, жителях России, так и на нейтрализацию антироссийских настроений и политико-идеологического происхождения за рубежом. Да, это не всем нравится, но будут терпеть, потому что деструктивная логика и вот эта агрессивная националистическая идеология будут попраны. И когда стало ясно, как вы, наверное, уже видели, что отменить русский язык и культуру не получится, западные политтехнологи принялись усердно работать над тем, чтобы отделить их от России как государства. Дошло до этого. Якобы, ну, с их точки зрения, или то, как они это запаковывают в свои так называемые нарративы, русский язык и культура принадлежат не нам. Нет, как они говорят, а якобы вообще всем, и как бы мы к этому, в общем, особого отношения не имеем. Я чего только на этот счет не читала. Типа, мол, отделите, они предлагают всему миру русскую культуру, российскую культуру, русский язык от Российской Федерации, как бы, ну, раз не получилось у них отменить. А Российскую Федерацию как бы нужно всячески с их точки зрения наказывать, пессимизировать, отменять и так далее. Ну, я даже не знаю, как это назвать. Безумным, нелепым, глупым, наверное, все вместе. И все это, конечно, обречено на очередной провал. Так что будем и дальше берите защищать нашу родную речь, нашу культуру, наш язык. При этом мы не жадные, мы наоборот готовы всех и учить, и приобщать, и делиться всеми нашими в этом смысле богатствами. И я готова ответить на ваши вопросы. С нами ли журнал «Международная жизнь»?
Да, Мария Владимировна, добрый день. Хотелось бы услышать ваш комментарий относительно недавней публикации корпорации BBC. В конце января этого года она вышла в свет. Так вот, в этой публикации говорится о том, что согласно некой утечке Россия использует список Интерпола для разыскиваемых лиц, чтобы преследовать критиков за рубежом. Вот как бы вы такую публикацию могли прокомментировать? Спасибо.
Ну это, к сожалению, BBC этим страдает, я имею в виду дезинформацией. Вот это очередной пример того, как этот британский телеканал, кстати говоря, государственный, распространяет дезу, обвиняя Россию в неких злоупотреблениях каналами международных организаций, в частности, Международной организации уголовной полиции, ну, то, что мы с вами знаем как Интерпол. Давайте посмотрим на реальность. Я, кстати говоря, видела и эти сообщения, и BBC, и до этого читала нечто аналогичное. И самое главное, почему, с чего они и когда они начинают заниматься подобными вбросами. Мы видели подобное не раз, поэтому уже поняли их систему. Вот, например, в 2018 году, это же издание,